Hey kids, howdy. Welcome once again. It is time for Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. It is September 15th. Fairly quiet week, Zoe. A couple of planetary sign changes, but we have our next eclipse on Sunday. So we'll talk
still
about
eclipse
it.
Season.
Yeah, we're still in eclipse season. We're still in the wormhole, even though there's not a whole lot that we're dealing with between now and Sunday, except for Venus and Mercury changing signs. And it's a new moon, which means that even though there's no more eclipses after it, it is a lunar cycle that is kicked off by an eclipse. So we'll talk about that.
Right.
It's a little spice on the eclipse and the 4 weeks that follow it. I just pushed the start date back for my next astrology teaching, but it's coming up. So I'm doing Intro to Transits Level 2. 3-week class, starts on October 4th for 3 Saturdays. And of course, you don't need to be there live. Last year, I did my Level 1, which is transits and the geometry and structure of them, and then a class on lunar transits and one on solar transits. So if you want to catch up and dive into transit astrology, you could get the Level 1 course and be ready in 3 or 4 weeks for Level 2. But check that out at michaellennox.com if you are interested in taking your astrology knowledge and working with transits to another level. So once again, I'm not going to do a question from, a listener, because there was something that happened this past week that is making me answer this question again, which I've covered before and probably will again, because it's one of the things about astrology that is confusing for people out there in the world, that also allows skeptics to have contempt prior to investigation. And it's this idea that people look up in the sky and they take out their phones, and I'm talking about like a Virgo full moon or a Pisces full moon, and they look up and they say, well, that's not where the moon is. My app says it's somewhere else. And it's like, yes, that's right, because we are not in alignment with the stars that we were facing thousands of years ago when astrology was first created.
Wait, how come?
Well,
I'll move start. Okay.
I'll get to that. That's the whole point of the how come. But why I'm answering this again is because there was a New York Times article about this. Every year or so, some writer decides to do a fluff piece on, your sun sign's not your sun sign kind of thing. But when it's the New York fucking Times, it's, read with more ubiquitousness. So I got a lot of emails and DMs. So yeah, that's the sort of the rub is what was your sign a few thousand years ago isn't, except that that's complete nonsense and comes from the notion that nobody knows what a Western astrology is or how it works when they're out there saying it's not accurate. This is loosely because in Western astrology, it ain't about placements as much as it is about time, and the time that it takes for the Earth to move 30 degrees around the sun. So let's start with precession. Precession is the notion that there's this wobble in the Earth based on its orbit and its tilt that then also has it moving through the solar system such that we are, say, facing the North Star today differently than we did 3,000-4,000 years ago. We would still have had north, and there would still have been a North Star, but it would have been something different, and the whole solar system has shifted over these thousands of years such that we are in a very different orientation to the constellations of the signs than we were back when these signs were first created. So that's why the people who don't know anything about how astrology works will say it's not accurate. The Alpha Omega of the astrological new year, the begin again moment, has nothing to do with the sky. It has to do with the relationship between the Earth and the sun and the vernal equinox. So that moment when the days and nights are of equal length because the sun is relating to the Earth in this sort of particular way that we call the vernal equinox, that's the beginning of our new year. So we call that 0 degrees of Aries. Not the Aries constellation, but the beginning of the Western zodiac. That is 0 degrees of Aries at the vernal equinox. And then the first sign of the zodiac, Aries, is in place for the time that it takes for the Earth to move 30 degrees around the sun. And when it gets there, it starts the next mansion, Taurus, and the time that it takes to move 30 degrees. So these are symmetrical 12 pieces of the pie of 30 degrees each that begins at the vernal equinox. Now, the movement of the solar system to be oriented differently, you might think sort of diminishes the power of when 0 degrees Aries was also aligned with the Aries constellation. But that's also a complete misunderstanding of what the stars in the sky were about, what their function was. They have nothing to do with the archetypal movement of this 30-degree, swaths of space. First of all, the constellations aren't 30 degrees wide symmetrically. Some are narrow,
They
some
are
are
where
wide,
they are.
some are a little above the ecliptic, some are a little below. You can think of the signs as like the billboards for the signs. Or like if you were in like an arena, the Colosseum, there might be a flag that waved above the 30 degrees of Aries. But that's the flag, the billboard, the constellation is not 0 degrees Aries. It connects to an origin story from thousands of years before that caused the vernacular of mythology to take a figure and place it in the sky as a kind of gift for its service. And that became a kind of origin story from the stars, but not the stars, from the story. Right? The stars are secondary. The story, that came right out of the human psyche. So then the story of Aries, as billboarded by the stars, is, for Western astrology, the 30 degrees and the time that it takes. So it's not inaccurate. It's just that the people who think it's inaccurate don't know how Western astrology works, so it gets very tiresome. Now you know, share the wisdom. Well, it's probably going to be another shorter episode this week because there's just not a lot to talk about outside of Mercury and Venus both changing signs. Now, certainly there's a shift in how we experience the day-to-day energy when Mercury moves into a new sign. Same with Venus. But the big deal about sign changes this year and next year, but very much this year, is because the outers and Saturn are holding degree points at the very beginning, like 0 and 1. Now that, Saturn is back in Pisces, he's at the 30th degree of Pisces. That means that any planet that changes from the 30th to the 0 degree of any sign, the sign change, those planets are going to be interacting directly with the big setup of the grand sextile of change, revolutionary change that's still in place. So yes, Mercury leaves his ruling sign of Virgo and moves into Libra on Thursday. He'll be there for a short period of time because he's just in a speedy moment in his orbit. So he'll only be in this sign for about 16 days, as opposed to 21, 22. At any rate, Mercury will now be getting his disposition from Venus. Disposition means that the sign the planet is in harkens to the ruling planet of that sign and gets its mood. So, Mercury is in a loving mood. Mercury is in a mediation, balanced, harmonizing voice moment where we will have easier access to peaceful conversations and an easy sense of finding the harmony in the neck up experience. But do understand that as Mercury moves in on Thursday, that the rest of the week has Mercury opposing Neptune, sort of generating a lot of confusion. Mercury is the perception planet, and Neptune is the unconscious fog machine planet. And opposition is a forced experience, right? You cannot avoid something in an opposition. So confusion from that. And then there's this fabulous grand air trine that Mercury will make as we step into the weekend with trining Uranus and Neptune. So what you want to know about this is enjoy the sense of like manifestation possibility. A grand trine is like a vortex of energy, all three players operating at their top, at the top of their game, singing in harmony. So perception and conversations and thoughts about the future will feel vibrant by connecting to both agents of change in a grand trine. But that opposition to Neptune is also there, which means any movement or propulsion into like new territory or things that feel sort of like dropped into your lap very suddenly, because that may happen in the second half of the week. Be a little extra discerning and just remind yourself that we can't see things as clearly as we think we are. And so it's very possible early on, like Wednesday, to feel baffled and confused. Maybe wait till Thursday, Friday for anything important from the neck up. Now, the very next day, Venus changes signs. Venus leaves the sign of Leo, where she's loving out loud and feeling sort of extroverted in matters of the heart. And on Thursday, she moves into Virgo, where for the next 3.5 weeks, our emotional body is driven or disposed by Mercury's ruling sign. So precision and getting things organized in an emotional way is part of what happens when Venus moves into the healing sign of Virgo. But what you really want to know about is like the 2 weeks of what we call mutual reception. Mutual reception means two planets are in each other's ruling sign. So Venus in Virgo is in one of Mercury's ruling signs. Mercury in Libra is in one of Venus's ruling signs. So one of the things that's present for us in the end of this week and like the following week and a half is that mind and heart, thoughts and feelings are going to be working with each other more effectively. And that will just color some of the conversations that are being had out there. One thing I know for sure I get from emails and DMs and commentary in social media is there have been a lot of hard conversations this month, especially from the full moon that was such a profound release mechanism, driven deeply and unconsciously because of the moon being in Pisces.
Yeah.
You know, and Venus inconjuncted that new moon when it was exact, which means the full moon sent our emotional intimacy and relationship into the territory of release, letting go. What are we letting go of in emotional patterning? So that helped make the full moon and the week after it very, challenging for intimacy, relationships, and connections. And so there were a lot of difficult conversations, which will just be slightly easier when these two folks are in mutual reception. There's something kind of beautiful happening on Friday when Venus changes signs early in the day, around 4 a.m. Pacific time, which I will be up for because I get up at 3.
3 o'clock?
Yeah, these days
Why do you
it's
think
3.
4:30
It used to
or
be
like-
4. Well, but I'm fully in bed at 7. I mean,
Yeah.
so 3 is not so unreasonable. When the time change comes, that'll wreck with it a little bit, and we'll see where I dial. I get up when I get up. Like I can't.
Wow. Yeah.
Can't help with the body. Anyway, on Friday around 4 a.m., Venus and the moon will be conjunct in Leo and then move into Virgo simultaneously, like an hour later. Now, I don't share this because, like, you should get up at 4 a.m. and feel this. Like, there's nothing energetic or embodied or somatic that counts here. But I always interpret synchronistic moments when the planets are telling a story by virtue of doing something that's, unusual. It is unusual for the moon and a planet to conjunct, and being a personal planet, that's moving fast enough for them to simultaneously enter a mansion. But the story it tells is that while we still have Venus in Leo, which is like a real love out loud sign placement, we can get bold in feeling and expressing love. And the moon is the arbiter to our unconscious mind. And as Venus is leaving this territory, sort of complete with whatever opportunity we have for pumping up our loving out loud, before she moves into Virgo, the unconscious shows up at the 30th degree of Leo. And the moon says to Venus, "Hey, baby, what's up? Been up to anything important lately?" "Why, yes, I have. I just finished moving through Leo." "I see, we're both in the same place. How wonderful that your end of Leo can be integrated, downloaded, and felt by us as now owned or understood more because of this little conjunction." And then Venus moves right into Virgo, sort of integrating that idea of loving out loud more in our bodies, because that's part of what Virgo does. Now, what Venus is doing that's very different from Mercury's ingress, Venus is giving us also like a shakeup that we have to be aware of, and then an important navigating mechanism. A square from Venus to Uranus is emotional excitement. Now, a lot of people think of Uranus as bringing bad things because he's in charge of the unexpected and the sudden. But when the planet that's doing the transiting is Venus, then love is what's up. Like the faster planet creates the transit. Like we wouldn't say Uranus is squaring Venus. We say Venus is squaring Uranus because it's a flyby and Uranus is much, much, much slower. But there can be yummy excitement when Venus squares Uranus, except the fact that we have this full moon release still sort of driving us. And this then shift with Venus now being in Virgo, shaking us up first with a square to Uranus. For any of you who are in like vulnerable relationship experiences, you can expect the end of the week to include some sort of a shakeup. But then when the moon inconjuncts both Neptune and Pluto, that's a finger of God. A finger of God is this long, narrow navigating mechanism. And when we move through one, we are making small changes based on the sort of psyche of the planets involved that can lead to very important and most importantly, different territory down the line. It's like an exit from the freeway. But when there's two of them, two inconjuncts, that adds the winds of fate. So we call it a finger of fate or finger of God, if you don't mind the G word. So Neptune and Pluto are sextiling each other. That's how we can have a yod, because there's a motor on the blunt end of a yacht. And in this case, it's power, authority, change, and transformation, working really well with our beliefs, our ideologies, our creative inspiration, and the things that drive us from deep inside of us. So Venus, on the other side of the cosmos, is saying, as we shift a little bit about how we give and receive love. I would love to see a lot of deserving come up from this, where Venus in Leo says you deserve everything and you deserve to have it delivered. And in Virgo, Venus is like, what do I have to do to make this happen? And one of the things that Venus in a finger of God with Pluto and Neptune is, you got to make big changes and trust your guidance, trust the flow that comes from intuition. And just know that though there's not a lot of kooky transits outside of what I've described this week, it's very much a week of love, the mind, the heart and the mind in congruency or out of congruency, and you've got to sort of pull it in. And all of this sort of sets us up for our eclipse new moon in Virgo that hits on Sunday. At 12:53 p.m. Pacific time on Sunday, the Virgo sun and the Virgo moon will come together at the 30th anaretic final mastery degree of Virgo. It's a partial solar eclipse, and it's also the second new moon in a row in the sign of Virgo. So let's start with that idea that this is the second new moon in Virgo. The new moon 4 weeks ago was at a very, very early degree point, 0 or 1, I'm not remembering in the moment, but early. And this one is at the final mastery degree. Now, technically a black moon in astrology would be 2 new moons in the same calendar month, just as a blue moon is 2 full moons in a calendar month. To me, this fits in the superstitious astrology that's just no longer viable. It's like who cares? I can't see the value of that. Outside of the synchronicity, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And you heard a lot of people talking about the black moon in a different way because there's an astronomical use of black moon to refer to 4 new moons in a season, when there are typically only 3. That's astronomical. And while pop astrologers have been, making a big deal of that black moon is not relevant to astrologers. I find it incredibly valuable when there are 2 new or full moons in a row in the same sign. Now it starts to feel like an opportunity to me. And so how I would describe that is 4 weeks ago, we set up a lunar cycle kicked off by a Virgo new moon. So we were in the mode of healing and organization and getting below things and managing your flesh experience so the spirit of Pisces could come through your body more powerfully in the eclipse. And now we get to do it again, only we're at a masterful place with understanding how we want to navigate, organize, put things together, get our ducks in a row in order to meet the demands that the world is putting us through. And so even if you were not somebody who followed astrology, right? And I'm thinking about people who aren't aware of these new moons, I would posit that there's a shift and a difference when you have 2 opportunities to dive into the same territory in the psyche and begin again. Even just the 30th anaretic degree has some extra emphasis because the 30th degree is masterful because whatever planet is at the 30th degree, it's turning around and looking at the mansion it's just been through saying, have I mastered this? So that's one thing you might want to do on Sunday is take a look at the last 4 weeks and how you relate to keeping your ducks in a row and things organized and sort of feeling like you're attending to your daily needs and nurturance and sustenance and fitness and all the ways that Virgo says, if you keep the body and the Merkaba, the sort of five-dimensional body, like in good shape, it'll run and run and run and run. So look at the last 4 weeks of Virgo consciousness and ask yourself, have I mastered this mansion? Is there anything about centering, healing, focus, and service? Because Virgo invented service. Aquarius tells us we have to serve humanity, but we understand how to do it with Virgo. Virgo's the one who says, yeah, go to the protest here, like there, make sure you rest on Friday and get your vegetables. And so, second opportunity.
I just made a note of that in my calendar.
Oh, good. I love that.
I just put it on Sunday, and it says, like, look at how you've been taking care of your body and schedule.
Love that. So, something that also then winds up happening both in the new moon and the next day is there's this grand trine that the new moon and Mercury, because Mercury is fairly close to the sun and the moon, but in Libra, that'll count in a second. So you've got sun and moon and Mercury trining Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini. That's a grand air trine. This is the second time we've been talking about grand trines this week because Mercury makes this grand trine sort of all on his own when he enters Libra earlier in the week. And now in the new moon, he's close enough to still be like actively connected in an intellectual way, an air way, right? That in this unencumbered mental place, when I say unencumbered, I mean less grabbed by the body and feelings and emotions, is aligned with slow change and fast change and managing it well. And so because Mercury is up there and the sun and the moon are meeting up at the last degree of Virgo, that means that immediately the moon's going to move into Libra, activating the grand air trine from a lunar perspective, an eclipsy perspective, and that's going to make Sunday's new moon kind of wacky energetically. And then we add Neptune and Saturn into this picture, and we get a kite formation. Kites fly. And how you get a kite formation is you got to have a grand trine, and then you have to have this sort of flatter triangle on one side of it. And if you can imagine the shape in your mind's eye, don't close your eyes if you're driving, that flatter triangle makes a kind of elongated diamond shape, or exactly like what a kite looks like. So the idea that kites fly means that you've got all kinds of planets in very productive and movement-oriented geometry. Trines are like movement. Sextiles are even more expansive with shift and change, because if you put some potential in, if you act in some behaviors that pick up responsibility and discipline from Saturn and ideology and intuition and flow and inspiration from Neptune, that's what's leading us forward. Saturn and Neptune are the head of the kite, which means we ain't gonna fly unless we honor what Saturn and Neptune are demanding of us, even if the tail of the kite is Mercury and the new moon. And you would think, well, that's going to shove this kite way up into the sky in the clouds, right? But the head of the kite is, are you doing your responsible work? Are you showing up to your karmic contract? Are you doing the right thing by virtue of what your life looks like and what the world is needing at this time? That's the influence of Saturn. And Neptune is the planet that allows us to tap into flow and the invisible and the unconscious, where all inspiration comes from. So when you're honoring this new moon with intentions or any kind of a ceremony for creating your like vision for the next little bit, you must put into your explorations what is Saturn wanting, what is Neptune offering for you in your life at this time, your experience of discipline, responsibility, and doing the right thing, and your version of letting inspiration flow through you so that you're, sort of held in the hands of grace. And the last thing I want to say about this eclipse and also the one we just had is that Venus is doing important work sort of in the background, meaning she's not been part of like big crashing waves of energy that, is grabbing all of our heart centers. It's more subtle. But what's interesting to me was that when Venus was in Leo and we moved through our full moon a week plus ago, she was in conjuncting the full moon. Like I talked about that at the top of the pod, where built into that full moon was a love-driven fork in the road to move away from things that aren't lighting your love button up or that aren't, reflecting the love you deserve. Certainly Venus and Leo would be like, I don't deserve this. I'm king of the forest. So you gotta, fix how you're loving me. And now Venus is in the healing sign of Virgo and making an inconjunct with Pluto during this new moon. So Venus is once again forming a fork in the road energy while we are moving through an eclipse. And the heart is allowing a deep release. Persephone goes into the underworld and says, Hades, let something go. More emphasis on relational endings, if that's part of your narrative right now. Both the lunar cycle we're in and the one we start on Sunday have subtle backdrop energy that says we're learning more and more about what we really desire in our hearts and being put through some intense psychic paces in order that we might open up the unconscious and have a healing release. Like the full moon in conjunct from Venus might be the awareness of what you're not getting that you deserve. And this one is the healing sense of what do I have to shift or change or drop or do or move away from or toward in order to have a more healed experience of my heart and draw more love to me. And have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. Today we have an email in dream, and we have an email from Gretchen. We haven't had an avalanche dream in a long time, so I was like, ooh, let's do this.
Okay.
Okay, Gretchen says, hello. Thanks so much for considering this. It's like magic listening to Dr. Michael pull the threads of even the wildest dreams into a meaningful whole.
Oh, I love that. How sweet.
Here's her dream. We were on a family vacation. Me, my real-life husband, and our 2 real-life kids. We were somewhere in the mountains in the west, in a tiny town. It was a thoroughly regular place, not a fancy resort town. It was late fall turning to winter. I left my family at the place we were staying and drove by myself in my small yellow car to the little grocery store. I pulled into the gravel lot behind a couple of other cars that were picking up groceries in an informal drive-through situation. I asked the man who was handing people their bags what the best way was to get groceries. He said I could give him a list and they would get going on it. Instead of just sitting in my car waiting, I decided to park and go into the store. There were a few people eating lunch at a counter. No one I knew, but friendly locals. The woman who was helping pull groceries from the shelves in the back said that they didn't have any celery seed because their seed delivery had been delayed. I said no problem. Side note, I really don't like celery seed. I don't know why this was in the dream, but it is a very memorable detail.
Okay.
Anyway, while I was looking around, another friendly local came on and sat down at the little lunch counter. He said it was getting rumbly out there. I asked, rumbly like how? And he was very expressively and kind of humorously intimidating a volcano erupting. I was curious, so I went outside to see what was up. I stood on the passenger side of my car and looked at the mountains. My back was to the store. I saw what I interpreted as shock waves or ripples running from right to left over the face of the mountains. There was a lot of low-level snow blowing through the conifers with the movement. It was actually quite beautiful, with flat, weak sunlight lighting up the blowing snow. I guess that the waves or ripples were the result of a large, distant earthquake. I suddenly heard a much closer roaring rumble and looked over the top of my car to my right. An enormous tidal wave / avalanche of snow was coming over the top of the building, bordering the gravel parking lot. I yanked open the passenger door and jumped in, slamming the door behind me. I closed my eyes and thought very clearly I might not survive this. During the whole time the avalanche was burying my car, I leaned hard against the seat / window and let my breath out on one long exhale. This out-breath probably lasted 8 to 10 seconds. When the snow pounding noise stopped, I opened my eyes. It was dim inside my car, and I knew my car was buried very thoroughly in the snow. I thought, oh, I'm not dead yet. And then immediately wondered how long it would take anyone to find me, and if I would be alive then. That's where it ended. Thank you, Gretchen.
Damn. Let us start at the top, as we always do, right? So if we're on a family vacation and it's the in real life family, then we're definitely in consideration of who Gretchen is, not just as an individual, but like who she is as a wife, as a mother, and as an individual. Mountains are like high-level consciousness, right? That the higher you go, the more vantage point you have, right? So all land would be consciousness or conscious awareness, but the higher you get, then you're in some interesting territory for consideration because you've got this higher vantage point. Like better to be in a dream resort in the mountains than in Death Valley, right? In terms of higher thought.
Sure.
It's in the west, which also implies endings, because west is the direction of sunset. And, in the 4 directions consciousness, beginnings are the east, the west is endings. And it's late fall turning to winter, which is another sort of symbol of, endings or stillness, right? Now that I'm talking about it, like a vacation is to pull yourself into extraordinary space. Like we leave ordinary space and we go to extraordinary space, and we have a good experience because we've changed how we're being stimulated. So whatever consideration that Gretchen is in that this dream is reflecting, it needs a kind of a ruminative, thoughtful consideration, meaning whatever she's exploring, it's deeper than what's overt and obvious, so much so that she's got to go on a little bit of a journey to find it. And ultimately, it's all about change, right? Because both volcanoes erupting are about massive sudden change that has been brewing below the surface, but then explodes very suddenly into new land, new consciousness, right? So the idea that far away, there's this new consciousness being spurted violently out of the Great Mother, to me, that's reminding me of the big changes on the planet, because none of us are escaping the changes. We could go on vacation, but we're still going to be in a world that's at war all over the place, right? So that to me is that volcano says it's changing out there. And then because it's changing out there, this small, tiny little town, right? It's not a big consciousness. I think it's deeply personal to Gretchen, that there's impact and change that's overwhelming on a personal level, but it also has to relate to the big, big changes from under the surface of consciousness that are happening out in the world. The fact that it's a regular place and not a resort is what tells us this trip into extraordinary space is more for deep consideration than rest and relaxation. It's not a resort dream, so she didn't go to this dream place to have a good time. This sort of reinforces the idea that this is personal to Gretchen. Even the small yellow car is interesting. Small car is more personal than big car. I mean, granted, if it's the car that got them all up there, well, because she said it, right? She didn't say yellow car. She said small yellow car. And so I have to incorporate that sort of declaration of smallness. And so even that tells me personal journey that relates to gut instincts, how you feel in a gut level. That's where we contract when we're afraid or disgusted or, having challenges with things that out there that we have to perceive. So I like the yellow color for bringing in a kind of third chakra experience, and then Gretchen can sort of make out for herself whether this is about following your instincts or not following your instincts, or just moving around the world, trusting what your gut tells you. The little grocery store suggests the personal ability to sustain and nurture, right? She wants to be fed, but she runs into a lot of problems doing it, right? She's not good at getting her needs met. So that might be a clue to one of the themes that she's exploring, because going grocery shopping is I feed myself. I can do it. I know how. I have the resources. I have the knowledge. I have the willingness. And the fact that she can't might point to issues of not being great at asking for needs to get met. Now, I don't know if I believe so much in what I'm about to say, but like the fact that she doesn't know the best way to get groceries and she asks, right? And so we might call this male figure like a guide or a helpful energy that's going to show her how to do things, right? But did you get what he was saying? I just give them a list. It's like, well, who are you? Where's the list coming from? Like, right, it like that I help moment isn't helpful in the dream narrative.
Right.
So we have to include that there's some idea of like either masculine principle of like decision making inside of her, or having to capitulate to masculine, guidance out in the world when, feminine stillness and creativity might be more trustworthy. So whoever the man represents, whether it's her internal decision maker or her responding to outside influences when choosing how to sustain herself. Don't ask that guy because he's not very helpful.
Well, she goes in anyway.
Well, she
does her
goes
own
in,
thing.
yes, so that's right. She pushes past. I would call that a moment
Yes.
of grit. She's like, I'm trying to find out what to do. No one can get me clear, so I have to do it myself. Yay, good for you. I'm trying to think of celery seed meaning. I mean, on the one hand, it's a seed, right?
So random. Maybe the
Well, it's
celery
very
is
random,
irrelevant,
right?
But the seed is relevant.
Well, the seed is definitely relevant because it's a seed. It may be a particular kind of seed, but the stronger moniker isn't celery, it's seed. That's what it is. It's a seed. What kind of seed? It's a celery seed. So it's the ability to plant something that she can't get to. So what happens right after this moment with the celery seed is we find out about the volcano, right? So the last act of the dream is everything's changing and breaking down, and it's, interesting. So there's something about not being able to get the capacity to grow something that might be important that is somehow represented by celery and not celery seed, even though one can use celery seed as a flavoring. To me, it's about planting the seed and growing something that is not available to you at this moment. I mean, I'm thinking about celery and celery soda and celery as a low-cal snack and how water-filled it is. Like, I don't know which one to grab. Like, if I had Gretchen here, I'd be like, give me your association with celery. Why celery? And again, I would parse out that it's not celery seed, it's celery. So I'm just going to say this. I'm saying this to have a placeholder in this. That the celery is what you want to grow because it's healthy. Right? I mean, you should really be growing spinach or kale for health. But that's what I got for you, Gretchen, about the celery seed that you can't get yet. If you can't get something that you need to grow something that you desire, and there's all of this change going on, then the thing to be doing, the action du jour is to be in all of this great change. It's interesting to me that she goes to where the community is in the store, the counter for lunch, right? That's, she's not shopping. She's not in the aisles. So she's like in a community sensibility and hitting this sort of overwhelming eruption that's going to impact everything. That's, as we said, it's sort of far away. It ripples, right? The shock waves ripple. That's what I mean by far away change that ripple throughout the world. Changes in Washington, D.C. ripple through the country. Things that are happening in Ukraine ripple across the international, communities. That's what I think the volcano is. Now, she stood by her car. She didn't get into it. That means to me that there's some correct impulse to not drive away, not to go save yourself, right? There's a thing happening and you've got to stay there to let it happen. The distant earthquake suggests that the foundation beneath us is shifting, it's changing. So the explosion of the volcano is like the big initiatory changes unavoidable. The distant earthquake says, oh, right, everything's changing. Like everything that we stand on foundationally is changing. And then this tidal wave. I love that she used the term tidal wave and avalanche. Right? We think of tidal wave as, water, and avalanche as snow or loose, soil. But snow is frozen water. So if water is our emotional nature and tsunamis represent like a unavoidable emotional overwhelm that you cannot escape, Either way she's
Right.
describing it, there's no escaping it, right? But it's also kind of interesting that in my interpretation of snow, I always talk about emotions and feelings that have been sort of frozen out, that have cooled off, that are too cold. And those are the sort of feelings that are overwhelming her, putting her in a place where, wow, the pause is utter. She's buried in the snow. That to me is like a pause for consideration underneath the emotional coolness that's overwhelming her. And she doesn't know how long it'll take till she's found. Well, it's going to take till you're done processing whatever it is you went on this
Right.
vacation to like figure out. In some ways, this dream asks more questions than it answers because it tells us the setup of all of the change and transformation and little small distinguishing, images and little nuances that I think are, more attuned to Gretchen's personal experience. But only Gretchen can sort of know how the ground moving beneath her feet is impacting her and her family as opposed to sort of, someone else. Gretchen will have to sort of explore what feels like it has sort of been cooled down in the feeling nature that hasn't been addressed for a long while, and it's coming crashing down and needs to be talked about. So Gretchen, I hope this felt like magic. Either way, you got some work to do. So go do that.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.